She sent 3 messages that night. The first one said, "Something is wrong. I am scared. Please come home." He read it. He did nothing. The second one said, "I am bleeding. I need you." He read it. He silenced his phone. The third one said, "If you cannot come, that is okay. I will figure it out. I always do." Those were the last words she ever sent him before
These
she
are the
collapsed on the
toxicology results
bathroom
for
floor.
Derek. As you can see, the
7
thallium
months
levels are
pregnant,
highly
alone,
elevated.
dying.
How?
While she
Court finds the
flatlined on an
defendant
operating
guilty on
table,
all
her
charges.
husband was laughing at
Order
a
in the
fancy
court.
restaurant with another woman, drinking champagne, ignoring 17 calls from the hospital. But here is what he did not know. His wife would survive. She would wake up, and she would discover something that would destroy him forever. He was not just cheating on her. He was not just stealing her money. He was slowly poisoning her. Every morning coffee, every smoothie he made for the baby, every loving gesture was a delivery system for death. This is the story of a woman who was erased by the man who promised to love her, and how she rose from the ashes to burn his entire world to the ground. Lesson and value statement. This story will teach you the warning signs that most women miss until it is too late. You will learn how predators isolate their victims, how to protect yourself legally and financially, and most importantly, you will learn that your pain is never an inconvenience, and your voice deserves to be heard. Meaning of the story. This is not just entertainment. This is a survival guide disguised as a story. Every woman who has ever been ignored, dismissed, or made to feel crazy for seeing the truth will find herself in these words. And every woman who stays until the end will walk away stronger, wiser, and more prepared to protect herself and the people she loves. They say the opposite of love is not hate. It is indifference. I learned that lesson on November 14th, lying on my bathroom floor, watching my husband's name light up my phone screen, and watching him decline the call 3 times. My name is Caroline Mitchell. My friends call me Carrie. And this is the story of how my husband tried to erase me from existence and how I refused to disappear. But let me start at the beginning, the real beginning. The moment when everything I believed about my marriage, my life, and my worth came crashing down around me, like a house built on sand. It was a Saturday night in Chicago. November cold had settled over the city like a gray blanket, and I was 7 months pregnant with our first child, a girl. We had already picked out her name, Lily. Derek had suggested it, said it reminded him of his grandmother. I thought it was beautiful. I thought a lot of things were beautiful back then. I was wrong about most of them. That evening, Derek had kissed me goodbye around 6 o'clock, told me he had an emergency meeting with a client whose portfolio was in crisis. He was a hedge fund manager, one of the best in the city, pulling in over $2 million a year. Emergencies happened. I understood. I had been a corporate lawyer before I gave up my career to support his. I knew what demanding work looked like. What I did not know was that his emergency meeting was happening at a candlelit table in a restaurant called Monteverde, and his client was a 29-year-old Instagram influencer named Vanessa Blake. I found that out later. What I knew that night was pain. It started around 8 o'clock, a sharp cramping in my lower abdomen that I initially dismissed as the baby moving, but it did not stop. It grew. Waves of pressure and heat that made me double over on the couch, then stumbled to the bathroom, and I felt something wet between my legs. Blood. Not a lot at first, but enough to make my heart race. I grabbed my phone and texted Derek. "Something is wrong. I am scared. Please come home." I watched the message deliver. I watched it show as read, and then I watched nothing happen. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10. The pain intensified. I texted again. "Derek, I am bleeding. I need you. Read." No response. My hands were shaking now. my vision starting to blur at the edges. I was alone in our Lincoln Park townhouse, a home we had bought together 3 years ago when Derek's career took off and mine became, as he put it, optional. I sent one more message. My fingers could barely find the keys. If you cannot come, that is okay. I will figure it out. I always do. That was the last message I sent my husband before I collapsed on the bathroom floor. I did not know it at the time, but while I was lying there, my baby in distress, my body failing, Derek was laughing at something Vanessa said. She had just told him a story about a rude customer at the boutique where she supposedly worked. He was refilling her wine glass. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he silenced it without looking. She asked if everything was okay. He said it was perfect, just his wife, probably asking what time he would be home to watch Netflix alone. They both laughed. Meanwhile, I was dying. I do not remember much after I hit the floor. Flashes, the cold tile against my cheek, the way my phone had skidded out of reach, the absolute silence of a house where no one was coming to help. What I remember clearly is waking up in a hospital bed with tubes in my arm and a monitor beeping beside me. What I remember is a nurse with kind eyes telling me that my daughter had been delivered by emergency cesarean section and was in the neonatal intensive care unit. What I remember is asking about my husband and watching that nurse's face change. He never came, did he? I said. It was not a question. She could not meet my eyes. My neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Kowalski, had saved my life. She was 73 years old, a Polish immigrant who had lived next door for 15 years. She heard a thump through our shared wall around 9:30 and came to check on me. Found the door unlocked because I always forgot to lock it when Derek was out. Found me unconscious on the bathroom floor in a pool of blood. She rode with me in the ambulance, holding my hand, calling Derek's phone over and over. 17 times, she told me later. 17 times straight to voicemail. I flatlined on the operating table, 47 seconds without a heartbeat, while doctors fought to save both me and my baby. They brought me back, but something in me stayed dead. The part that believed in my marriage, the part that trusted the man I had loved for 12 years. Derek finally showed up 6 hours after my first message, around 4:30 in the morning. He was disheveled, his collar crooked, a smear of lipstick on his neck he had not noticed. He carried gas station flowers and wore the expression of a man who had rehearsed his apology too many times. The receptionist told me later what she said to him. Your wife coded twice. Your daughter is in intensive care. Where were you? His answer. Traffic. Meeting ran late. You know how it is. No, I did not know how it was, but I was about to learn. When Derek walked into my hospital room with his wilting carnations and his practiced concern, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something clearer. Baby, he said, rushing to my bedside, I am so sorry. My phone died. I came as soon as I heard. I looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. I saw the lie in his eyes before he even finished speaking. Your phone died, I repeated. Yeah, completely dead. I had no idea until I got the voicemail from the hospital and found a charger. Derek, I said quietly, I have read receipts. His face went pale. That micro expression of shock that lasted maybe half a second before he recovered. But I saw it. After 12 years, I knew every flicker of his face. And I knew what guilt looked like. You read my messages, I continued, all 3 of them. You read a pregnant woman telling you she was scared, that she was bleeding, that she needed you, and you chose to do nothing. He tried to pivot, the way he always did. Carrie, you are being dramatic. I was in an important meeting. I could not just leave in the middle of a crisis, at 10 o'clock at night, on a Saturday. Clients do not care about weekends. You know that. I did know that. I also knew that no client meeting ended with lipstick on your collar. Get out, I said. His expression shifted from defensive to wounded. Classic Derek, always the victim, even when he was the perpetrator. Carrie, our daughter is in the NICU, and you are worried about text messages. This is exactly what I mean about your priorities. I said get out. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he set down the pathetic flowers and walked out of the room, and I was alone again. But this time, alone felt different. This time, alone felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. Ladies, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. When someone shows you who they are, through their actions, not their words, believe them the first time. I had been believing Derek's apologies for years. That night, his silence spoke louder than any sorry ever could. But here is the thing about women like me, women who have spent a decade making excuses for men who do not deserve them. We are really good at hoping. We are experts at finding reasons to believe that this time will be different, that the tears are real, that the promises will stick. Derek came back the next morning with a grand gesture designed to break through my defenses. Massive flower arrangement, not gas station carnations this time, but roses and lilies and orchids that must have cost $500. Designer baby clothes in soft pinks and whites, a brochure for a couple's therapy retreat in Arizona, and himself on his knees beside my hospital bed, crying. I almost lost you, he said, his voice cracking. Both of you. I was lying there last night in our empty house, and I realized I have been taking you for granted for years. You gave up your career for me. You supported every crazy hour, every missed dinner, every time I put work first. And I repaid you by not being there when you needed me most. He grabbed my hand, pressed it to his forehead. I am so sorry, Carrie. I know sorry is not enough, but I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. To both of you. I looked at this man, my husband of 12 years, the father of my daughter, who was fighting for her life 2 floors above us. I looked at his tears, his shaking shoulders, his seemingly broken heart, and I wanted to believe him. Every woman who has been in this position knows this moment. The moment when hope feels stronger than evidence. The moment when love, or what we think is love, overrides logic. I thought about our wedding day, the way he had looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I thought about the early years when we would stay up until 3 in the morning talking about our dreams. I thought about the baby we had made together, the life we had built. Maybe, I thought, maybe this was his wake-up call. Maybe almost losing us was what he needed to become the man I had always believed he could be. Okay, I said quietly. We can try. The relief on his face was instantaneous. He hugged me carefully, mindful of my incision, and I felt his heart pounding against my chest. Over his shoulder, I saw his phone light up on the bedside table. A text from someone labeled V with a kiss emoji. He reached back and silenced it without looking, still holding me. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself the V could stand for anything. Vernon from accounting, Victor, his old college roommate, anyone. I was lying to myself, and somewhere deep down, I knew it. But I was not ready to face the truth. Not yet. Lily came home from the NICU 2 weeks later, small but healthy, her lungs strong, her grip surprisingly powerful when she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. Derek was there for the homecoming. He carried the car seat inside like he was transporting precious cargo, which he was. He set up the nursery while I rested, hung the mobile we had bought together, arranged the stuffed animals by size. For 3 weeks, I had the husband I had always wanted. He brought me breakfast in bed. He took the 2 a.m. feedings without complaint, walking Lily around the living room and singing off key lullabies that made her gurgle instead of cry. He came home at reasonable hours, put his phone face down on the counter, focused on us. I started to let my guard down, started to believe that near tragedy had genuinely changed him. I should have known it was just the eye of the storm. The package arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 23 days after Lily came home. No return address, just my name typed on a plain white label. I assumed it was a baby gift from someone at Derek's firm. Another silver spoon or cashmere blanket to add to the pile. I opened it at the kitchen table while Lily napped in her swing. Inside was not a gift. Inside was the truth. Photos. Dozens of them. Derek and a woman I did not recognize, though her Instagram perfect face would become burned into my memory. Vanessa Blake. Derek and Vanessa at restaurants I had never been to. Derek and Vanessa entering hotel rooms with do not disturb signs. Derek and Vanessa on the yacht I had never seen, somewhere tropical, both of them laughing, his hand on her bikini-clad hip. The dates on the photos went back 3 years. 3 years, including photos from our anniversary trips, the ones where Derek had supposedly been in meetings while I toured wine country alone. The ones where he had client dinners that ran late while I ate room service in our hotel room. He had been with her the whole time. Our entire marriage, or at least the last quarter of it, had been a performance. There was a note at the bottom of the stack, handwritten in neat cursive. You deserve to know what your husband does when he works late. There is more. Check his second phone. Look in his briefcase. The truth will set you free, even when it breaks your heart. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, photos spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. Lily cooed in her swing, oblivious to the fact that her mother's world had just shattered for the second time in a month. Then I heard the shower turn on upstairs. Derek, home early for once, washing off whatever lies he had been telling today. I did not confront him. A month ago, I would have. I would have stormed upstairs, thrown the photos in his face, demanded answers through tears. But something had changed in me since that night on the bathroom floor. The woman who died for 47 seconds had not come back exactly the same. Instead, I calmly gathered the photos, put them back in the envelope, and hid them in the closet where I kept my old law school files. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust. Maggie Collins, my best friend from law school who had gone on to become one of the most feared divorce attorneys in Chicago. I had not talked to her in months because Derek found her abrasive and always had convenient conflicts. Whenever she invited us to dinner, I should have seen that red flag too. Maggie answered on the second ring. Carrie Mitchell, I thought you had died or joined a cult. What is wrong? I need a divorce attorney, I said quietly. The best one in Chicago. Honey, she replied without missing a beat, I am the best one in Chicago. What did that bastard do? I told her everything. The hospital, the ignored messages, the photos, the 3 years of lies. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. Do not confront him. Do not let him know you know anything. From this moment on, you are gathering evidence and building a case. He has been planning whatever this is for years. You need to be just as strategic. Can you do that? I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully in her swing, at the home I had built with a man who had been counting down the days until he could replace me. Yes, I said, I can do that. The next few weeks taught me something about myself that I had forgotten during my years as Derek's wife. I was smart, not just intelligent in the way that gets you through law school, but strategically smart. The kind of smart that builds cases, finds patterns, anticipates moves. Derek had spent years making me feel like my opinions did not matter, like my career had been a hobby that I had wisely abandoned, like I should be grateful he kept me around at all. I had internalized so much of that diminishment that I had forgotten who I was before him. Maggie helped me remember. She connected me with Jerome Washington, a private investigator who had spent 20 years with the FBI before going private. He was a tall black man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that made you want to tell him everything. We met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, far from anywhere Derek might have contacts. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jerome said, sliding into the booth across from me, "in my line of work, I have seen pretty much everything. Cheating husbands are about 60% of my caseload. What makes yours different?" I pulled out the photos, spread them across the table. He studied them without reaction, his face professionally neutral. "These go back 3 years," I said, "but I have a feeling this did not start with Vanessa Blake. And I have a feeling she is not who she claims to be." "What makes you say that?" "She is too polished." I scrolled through Vanessa's Instagram on my phone, showing him the carefully curated feed: fitness influencer, lifestyle brand, sponsored posts for protein powder and yoga pants. But look at her engagement rate compared to her follower count. Look at how her content changed right around the time she started seeing Derek. She went from posting gym selfies to posting photos at restaurants and resorts that cost $5,000 a night. You think she is after his money. I think she is after something. I just do not know exactly what yet. Jerome nodded slowly. "I will dig into her background. Real name, real history. If there is something there, I will find it." "I need everything," I said. "Every lie he has told, every dollar he has hidden, every woman before her." Women? Plural? Call it intuition, or call it 12 years of marriage to a man who I am now realizing I never actually knew. Jerome took the case. Over the next month, he became my secret weapon while I played the role of oblivious wife. It was harder than I expected, pretending I did not know what I knew. Smiling at Derek over dinner while imagining Vanessa in his lap. Making love to him because refusing would raise suspicions. Then showering afterward until my skin was raw. But I did it. Every day, I gathered more evidence. Every night, I added to my file. And slowly, the picture began to come together. Derek had a second phone. I found it exactly where the anonymous note said it would be, tucked into a hidden compartment in his briefcase that I never would have found if I had not been looking. The texts between him and V were explicit, detailed, and damning. They had pet names for each other. He called her his escape. She called him Daddy. I wanted to vomit when I read that. But worse than the affair itself was what I found when I dug deeper. Bank statements for an account I had never seen, opened at a bank in the Cayman Islands, funded by transfers from our joint accounts disguised as business expenses. Over $2 million that Derek had siphoned off over the past 3 years. Maggie reviewed the financial documents in her office, her face growing darker with each page. "He has been preparing for this," she said. "The offshore accounts, the way he has been slowly moving assets out of marital property. This is not a man who got caught up in an affair. This is a man who has been planning to leave you for years." "Then why hasn't he?" I asked. Maggie looked at me with something like pity. "Honey, your parents are worth $40 million. Derek married you when you were both broke law students. Now you are the sole heir to a fortune, and your dad just got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The room spun. My father's diagnosis had been 6 months ago. Private. We had not even told Derek's family yet. "How did you know about my father?" I did not, but I am guessing Derek did. He opened that Cayman account 8 months ago, right around the time of your dad's diagnosis. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Derek was not just having an affair. Derek was not just stealing from me. Derek was waiting for my father to die, waiting for me to inherit. And then, I think he was planning to take everything," Maggie said gently. the inheritance, the house, probably even custody of Lily. He would paint you as the unstable one, the jealous wife who could not handle his success. And with his resources and connections, he probably would have gotten away with it. I sat in her office for a long time, processing. The man I had married, the man I had given up my career for, the man whose child I had carried, had been planning to destroy me. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated me. Jerome's report came in 2 weeks later. We met at the same coffee shop, same booth. He slid a thick folder across the table. "Your instincts were right," he said. "Vanessa Blake is not her real name. She was born Victoria Sanders in Tampa, Florida. 31 years old, not 29, and she has done this before." "How many times?" "4 that I can confirm. All wealthy married men, all similar patterns. She ingratiates herself, establishes the affair, helps isolate the wife, and then things get ugly." "What do you mean, ugly?" Jerome opened the folder to a newspaper clipping. One of her previous targets, a real estate developer in Phoenix, died of a heart attack 18 months into his relationship with Victoria. He was 44 years old, perfect health, ran marathons. His wife received a $2 million life insurance payout. Victoria disappeared right after, resurfaced 6 months later in Dallas with a new name and a new target. "You think she killed him?" "I think his death was very convenient for everyone except him. I also think you need to be very careful, Mrs. Mitchell. This woman is not just a gold digger. She is a predator." I stared at the folder, at the smiling face of Victoria Sanders / Vanessa Blake, at the trail of destroyed marriages and suspicious deaths she had left behind. What about the other targets? One went bankrupt in the divorce, lost his business, his house, his kids, committed suicide 2 years later. Another managed to get out with minimal damage, but only because his wife caught on early and had resources to fight. The fourth is ongoing, a tech executive in Seattle who thinks he is about to leave his wife for his soulmate. "She has a pattern," I said. "She has a system. And your husband is her current project." I closed the folder and looked Jerome directly in the eyes. "Then we need to make sure she does not finish it." The worst part about what came next was that I never saw it coming. I had been so focused on building my case, on gathering evidence, on preparing for the divorce battle I knew was coming. I had forgotten that Derek was building his own case too. And his, it turned out, was much more sinister than mine. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early January. Lily was 3 months old, sleeping in her carrier, while I pretended to go to a postpartum checkup. In reality, I was meeting with Jerome to review his latest findings on Vanessa's network. She had accomplices, he had discovered, other women who helped her run her schemes. One of them, a woman named Brittany Cole, had been posing as Derek's executive assistant for the past 6 months. I was supposed to be gone for 2 hours. I came home after 90 minutes because Jerome got called away for another case. Derek's car was in the driveway. He was supposed to be in New York for a client meeting. Strike one. There was another car I did not recognize, a white Mercedes SUV. Strike two. And there was a police cruiser parked at the curb. Strike three. My heart started pounding as I pulled into the garage. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, the same way I had felt something wrong that night on the bathroom floor. I carried Lily's carrier inside, through the garage entrance, moving quietly, listening. Voices came from the living room. Derek's, a woman's, an older woman's, an older, and 2 men I did not recognize. I stepped around the corner and found them waiting for me. Derek stood by the fireplace, his face arranged in an expression of concern. Beside him was his mother, Helen Mitchell, who I had not seen since Thanksgiving, and who had never particularly liked me. On the couch sat Vanessa Blake, looking demure in a conservative dress I had never seen her wear in any of her Instagram photos. She was holding a tissue like she had been crying, and standing by the front door were two men, one in a police uniform, one in a white coat with a clipboard, a psychiatrist, I would later learn. Dr. Harrison Wells, who Derek had been paying for the past 2 months to establish a paper trail of my supposed mental instability. "Carrie," Derek said, stepping toward me with his hands raised like I was a frightened animal. "We need to talk about what is best for you." "What is going on?" I asked, though I already knew. I could feel the trap closing around me. Helen spoke next, her Boston accent sharpening her words. "Sweetheart, we are all very worried about you. Derek has been telling us about your episodes, the paranoia, the accusations, the way you have been neglecting Lily." "I have not been neglecting anyone," she continued, as if I had not spoken. "We think you need help, professional help, before you hurt yourself or the baby." I looked at Vanessa, sitting on my couch, in my house, with my family. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. "I am so sorry about all of this. I never meant to cause problems. I am just as Derek's assistant. Mrs. Mitchell has been harassing me for weeks, sending threatening messages, following me to work." She held up her phone, showed the screen to the police officer. I saw texts from my number, texts I had never sent, threatening violence, accusing her of sleeping with my husband. "Those are fake," I said, my voice rising. "She fabricated those. She is his mistress." Everyone in the room exchanged looks, concerned looks, the kind of looks you give someone who is saying crazy things. "See what I mean?" Helen said to the psychiatrist, completely detached from reality. The psychiatrist stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am Dr. Wells. Your husband has filed a petition for emergency psychiatric evaluation based on concerns about your mental state. We just need to ask you a few questions." I understood then what was happening. Derek had not just been planning to leave me. He had been planning to have me committed, to take my baby, to paint me as insane so that when the truth about his affair came out, no one would believe me. If I stayed calm, they would say I was suppressing my emotions. If I got angry, they would say I was unstable. Either way, I lost. Derek walked over and reached for Lily's carrier. "I think it is best if Lily stays with my mother until you get the help you need." I held on, my grip tight. "You are not taking my baby, Carrie," he said, his voice dripping with false compassion. "I am not taking her. I am protecting her. From you." The police officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I looked around the room at my husband, his mother, his mistress, the bot psychiatrist, the uniformed officer. I was alone against all of them, and I realized, with a sinking certainty, that I had lost this round. Ladies, if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, let me tell you what I wish I had known. Document everything, record when legal, and never, ever go to these meetings without your own lawyer present. My mistake was not trusting my husband. My mistake was showing up alone. They took Lily. They put me in the back of an ambulance while I cried and pleaded and promised I was not crazy. They drove me to a psychiatric facility on the outskirts of the city where I was stripped of my phone, my belongings, my dignity. 72-hour hold for evaluation. 3 days where I had no rights, no access to the evidence I had gathered, no way to contact Maggie or Jerome or anyone who could help. I sat in that hospital gown, in that sterile room, and I understood, finally, what Derek was capable of. This was not about love gone wrong. This was not about a man who made a mistake with another woman. This was about power. This was about money. This was about a man who had spent 3 years planning to steal everything from me and leave me with nothing. And in that moment, sitting alone in a psychiatric ward while my husband celebrated with his mistress. I made a decision. I was not going to let him win. The psychiatric facility was called Riverside Wellness Center, which was a pleasant name for what amounted to a prison. White walls, locked doors, nurses who treated you like you might explode at any moment. I was evaluated by 3 different doctors in 48 hours, asked the same questions over and over, watched for signs of the instability my husband had invented. I stayed calm. I answered every question thoughtfully, rationally. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not give them any ammunition. On the second night, a nurse named Beverly came to check my vitals. She was in her 50s, heavy-set, with kind eyes and a wedding ring that had worn a permanent groove into her finger. "You do not seem crazy to me," she said quietly, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "I am not crazy. My husband is framing me to steal custody of our daughter." She nodded slowly, like this was not the first time she had heard a story like mine. "Happens more than you would think. Men with money. They know how to work the system. I need to make a phone call. You are only allowed one." "Who are you going to call?" I had thought about this for hours. My instinct was to call Maggie, my lawyer, but Derek would expect that. He would have someone monitoring the situation, ready to counter whatever legal moves I made. Instead, I gave Beverly a different number. Mrs. Dorothy Kowalski, my neighbor. Beverly raised an eyebrow, but did not question it. She handed me the phone. Mrs. Kowalski answered on the 4th ring, her voice groggy. "Hello? Mrs. Kowalski, it is Carrie. I need your help." "Carrie, where are you? Your husband said you went to visit family." "I'm in a psychiatric facility. Derek had me committed. I need you to go to my house right now before he gets rid of the evidence." I gave her instructions. Top shelf of my closet, behind the old law school boxes. A blue folder with everything Jerome and I had collected. Photos, financial records, the second phone I had photographed before putting it back. "You get that folder," I told her, "and you take it straight to Margaret Collins. Her number is inside. Do not let anyone see you. Do not tell anyone where you are going." Mrs. Kowalski did not ask questions. 80 years of living had taught her when to act and when to ask why. "I will go now," she said. "And Carrie? That husband of yours?" I never liked him. I know. I should have listened. Maggie showed up at Riverside the next morning with an emergency court order and a fury that made the facility administrators tremble. She had the folder. She had everything. "My client is being held against her will based on fraudulent statements," Maggie announced to the head psychiatrist, her voice carrying through the hallway. Her husband filed commitment papers claiming she was a danger to herself and her child. "I have evidence that he fabricated text messages, paid a psychiatrist to provide false testimony, and is currently engaged in an extramarital affair with the woman he claims my client was stalking." She slapped a thick folder on the desk. "This includes photos of Mr. Mitchell with his mistress dating back 3 years, financial records showing he has hidden over $2 million in offshore accounts, and sworn statements from a licensed private investigator detailing a pattern of deception and fraud." The head psychiatrist went pale. Mrs. Mitchell showed no signs of psychiatric disturbance during her evaluation. "Then release her. Now." I walked out of a Riverside Wellness Center at 11:47 a.m., wearing the same clothes I had been wearing when they brought me in. Maggie was waiting in her car, engine running. "Your neighbor is a saint," Maggie said as I climbed in. "She also recorded your husband and his girlfriend celebrating in your living room the night you were committed. Want to hear them laughing about how easy it was?" "Later. First, I need my daughter back. Already filed for emergency custody. Hearing is tomorrow morning. Based on the evidence of Derek's fraud in the commitment proceedings, I think we have a strong case. I leaned back in the seat, exhausted but focused. What about criminal charges? Maggie hesitated. That is where it gets complicated. We have enough for civil fraud, definitely enough for the divorce. But criminal conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, that requires proving intent, and Derek has good lawyers. Then we find more evidence. I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, gray and cold and indifferent. There is more. I know there is. Vanessa Blake is not just a mistress. She is a professional, and professionals leave trails. What kind of professional? The kind who targets wealthy married men and leaves dead bodies behind. Maggie glanced at me sharply. You think she has done this before? Jerome found 4 other targets. One of them died under suspicious circumstances. There was a long silence. Then Maggie said, "We need to be very careful how we play this. If Vanessa Blake is as dangerous as you think, she will not go down without a fight. Neither will I." The custody hearing was at 9 a.m. the next morning. I showed up in a conservative navy dress, hair pulled back, minimal makeup, the picture of a stable, rational mother. Derek showed up with his lawyer, a high-priced family attorney named William Foster, who had a reputation for winning ugly custody battles. Derek looked confident, smug even. He still thought he was winning. The judge reviewed both petitions. Derek's claimed I was mentally unstable, a danger to our child, too erratic for unsupervised visitation. Mine claimed he had committed fraud, fabricated evidence, and conspired with his mistress to have me illegally committed. Mr. Mitchell, the judge said, I have reviewed the documentation submitted by your wife's attorney, including photographs and financial records that directly contradict your claims about her mental state. Can you explain why your wife was committed to a psychiatric facility based on evidence that appears to be fabricated? Derek's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off. I have also reviewed video evidence of you and Ms. Vanessa Blake in your marital home celebrating your wife's commitment. The judge's voice was ice cold. Your own words were, and I quote, "She actually believed I was working late, like taking candy from a baby." The color drained from Derek's face. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting temporary full custody to Mrs. Mitchell, effective immediately. I am also issuing a restraining order prohibiting Mr. Mitchell from coming within 500 feet of his wife or daughter. Mr. Mitchell's assets are frozen, pending investigation into potential fraud. The gavel came down. Derek stood frozen, his perfect plan crumbling around him. I collected my daughter from Helen Mitchell, who could not meet my eyes as she handed over the carrier. Lily was sleeping, peaceful, unaware of the war being fought over her future. This is not over, Derek said as I walked past him. I know, I replied. It is just beginning. 1 week after the custody hearing, I got a phone call that changed everything again. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Dr. Rhodes from Northwestern Memorial. We need you to come in immediately. Your blood work from your postpartum checkup showed some concerning results. I assumed it was something routine. Iron deficiency, thyroid imbalance, the kind of things that happen after pregnancy. I left Lily with Mrs. Kowalski and drove to the hospital, my mind still focused on the divorce proceedings. Dr. Rhodes was waiting in his office. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, the kind of doctor who had seen everything and was rarely surprised. But when I sat down across from him, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. Carrie, he said quietly, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you experienced any unusual symptoms over the past several months? Fatigue? Nausea beyond normal pregnancy symptoms? Hair loss? Cognitive fog? I thought about it. Yes, all of those things. but I assumed it was just the pregnancy, the stress. Dr. Rhodes nodded slowly. We ran additional tests on your blood samples, not just the standard panel. When I saw the abnormalities, I ordered a toxicology screen. He slid a paper across the desk. I looked at it, but did not understand the medical terminology. What am I looking at? Thallium, he said. You have elevated levels of thallium in your system, not enough to kill you outright, but enough to cause serious health problems over time. The levels suggest sustained exposure over at least 6 months. I do not understand, Carrie. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. Someone has been poisoning you. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair to keep from falling. The complications during your pregnancy, Dr. Rhodes continued, the hemorrhaging, the placental abruption, even the way you coded on the operating table. None of that was normal for a healthy woman your age. I kept wondering what we were missing. Now I know. How long? I whispered. Based on the accumulation levels, at least 6 months, possibly longer. The symptoms would have been gradual, easy to dismiss, easy to attribute to pregnancy. 6 months. That was around the time Derek had started bringing me breakfast in bed every morning. Smoothies for the baby, he would say. Special coffee with extra supplements, dinner when I was too tired to cook. Every loving gesture, every small kindness, all delivery systems for poison. The man I had married, the father of my child, had been slowly killing me, and he had smiled at me every morning, kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, while he counted down the days until my heart gave out. I need to report this to the police, Dr. Rhodes said. This is attempted murder. I nodded, unable to speak. My mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the Derek I had known, or thought I had known, with the monster who had been poisoning his pregnant wife. Jerome's voice echoed in my memory. One of her previous targets died of a heart attack. 44 years old, perfect health. Vanessa, Victoria Sanders, the woman who left a trail of dead men behind her. Derek was not just having an affair. He was not just stealing my money. He was not just trying to take my daughter. Derek and Vanessa were planning to murder me. And if Mrs. Kowalski had not heard me fall that night on the bathroom floor, they would have succeeded. The next few days were a blur. Police interviews, more medical tests, forensic accountants tracing the thallium to purchases made on Derek's business account. Jerome connecting the dots between Vanessa's previous victims and the same poison. It turned out Derek had taken out a $5 million life insurance policy on me 8 months ago, right around the time of my father's cancer diagnosis, right around the time he started making those special smoothies. His plan was elegant in its cruelty. Poison me slowly, make it look like pregnancy complications or postpartum health issues, collect the insurance, wait for my father to die and inherit his fortune, then ride off into the sunset with Vanessa, leaving no one to question what had happened to poor Carrie Mitchell, who just could not recover from childbirth. They had done this before. 3 other women, according to Jerome's expanded investigation, 3 other wives of wealthy men who had died or been destroyed. Vanessa and her network had been running this scheme for almost a decade. But they had made one mistake. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that a woman who had given up her career, who had spent years being diminished and dismissed, who had learned to make herself small to fit into her husband's life, would be easy prey. They forgot that before I was Derek Mitchell's wife, I was Caroline Adams, top of her class at Northwestern Law, the woman who had won impossible cases before she traded her briefcase for a baby monitor. That woman had been sleeping, but she was awake now, and she was angry. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. Derek was staying at a corporate apartment downtown, his assets frozen, his access to our home restricted by the restraining order. He thought he was still in control. He thought his lawyers would get him out of this mess like they had gotten him out of every other mess. He did not know about the poison, not yet. The FBI, YACN, and Chicago PD coordinated the arrest. Jerome had given them everything: the financial records, the connection to Vanessa's previous victims, the evidence of the insurance fraud. When they added the attempted murder charge, Derek's expensive lawyers suddenly had much bigger problems than a contentious divorce. I was not there for the arrest, but Maggie was. She called me afterward, her voice thick with satisfaction. They got him at the apartment. He was in his bathrobe, drinking coffee, probably thinking about how to spin the custody loss. When they read him the charges, he actually said, and I quote, "This is my wife's doing. She is mentally unstable. She is making all of this up." Then they told him about the thallium, about the purchase records, about the life insurance policy. Maggie paused. He stopped talking after that. What about Vanessa? They picked her up at O'Hare. She was trying to board a flight to Lisbon using a fake passport. They found $200,000 in cash in her carry-on and a laptop with files on her next 3 targets. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "It is over," Maggie said, "or it will be once they go to trial." But it was not over. Not quite, because there was one more twist I had not anticipated. Helen Mitchell called me 3 days later. Derek's mother, the woman who had stood in my living room and watched her son try to have me committed. I almost did not answer. "Carrie," she said when I picked up, "I need to see you. Please, there are things you need to know." I met her at a restaurant in the Gold Coast, neutral territory. She looked older than I remembered. The confident Boston matriarch replaced by someone who had not slept in days. "I did not know," she said as soon as I sat down, "about the poison, about Vanessa, about any of it. You knew about the affair. I suspected. I did not want to believe it." Helen's hands trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. Derek was always my blind spot. His father was the same way. Charming on the surface, something broken underneath. I spent 40 years making excuses for a man who never deserved them. And I raised my son to be exactly like him. I said nothing. What was there to say? "After your father-in-law died," Helen continued, "I found things. Evidence of other women, other schemes, other lies. I told myself it did not matter, because he was gone. But then I watched my son do the same things, and I said nothing. I let it happen." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are records from Derek's business account going back 10 years. Payments to Vanessa Blake starting 3 years ago, but also payments to other women before her. Your husband has been running these schemes since before he met you, Carrie. You were never meant to be a partner. You were always meant to be a target." I took the envelope, not sure what to feel. "I will testify," Helen said, "against my own son. I will tell the court everything I know, everything I should have seen, everything I was too much of a coward to stop." Why? Because I have a granddaughter, and I will not let her grow up thinking that what her father did was acceptable. I will not let her become the next woman a man like him destroys. I studied Helen's face, looking for the manipulation, the hidden agenda, but all I saw was a woman finally reckoning with the consequences of her silence. "Thank you," I said finally. "Do not thank me. I should have done this years ago." Helen stood, gathering her coat. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I hope someday you will let me be part of Lily's life. I want to be the grandmother I should have been from the beginning." She left before I could respond. I sat alone at the table, the envelope heavy in my hands, trying to process this final twist. I had spent months preparing to fight alone, building my case, gathering my evidence, armoring myself against a world that seemed determined to destroy me. But I was not alone anymore. I had Maggie. I had Jerome. I had Mrs. Kowalski. And now, improbably, I had Helen. Here is something I learned during those dark months. When you are fighting a monster, do not fight alone. My power did not come from rage. It came from coalition, from finding other victims, connecting their stories, turning individual tragedies into a pattern even the most skeptical prosecutor could not ignore. If you have been harmed, chances are you were not the first. Find the others. There is strength in numbers. The trial of Derek Mitchell and Victoria Sanders, also known as Vanessa Blake, began on a cold Monday in March. The courtroom was packed, media in the back rows, victims' families scattered throughout, curious onlookers who had followed the case in the news. I sat in the front row with Maggie on one side and Lily and her carrier on the other. My daughter was 6 months old now, healthy and thriving, unaware that the next few weeks would determine the rest of her life. Derek and Vanessa sat at separate defense tables, a strategic choice by their lawyers to prevent the jury from seeing them as a unified conspiracy. Vanessa had cut her hair, removed her extensions, dressed in conservative clothes that made her look like a Sunday school teacher. Derek wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his expression arranged in thoughtful concern. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Financial records showing the offshore accounts, purchase records for thallium, medical testimony about my poisoning and the long-term effects it would have on my health, detective testimony about Vanessa's previous victims, the pattern of wealthy married men who ended up dead, bankrupt, or destroyed. Then they called me to the stand. I had rehearsed my testimony 100 times. I knew the questions that would come, the attempts to discredit me, the insinuations that I was lying or exaggerating or seeking revenge. I was ready for all of it. What I was not ready for was looking at Derek across that courtroom and feeling nothing. Mrs. Mitchell, the prosecutor said, "Can you describe the night of November 14th for the court?" I did. The pain, the messages, the silence, the collapse, the flatline. I kept my voice steady, my words precise. I was not there to cry or perform emotion. I was there to tell the truth and let the jury decide. When I finished, Derek's defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was a bulldog of a man named Thomas Hartley, famous for dismantling witnesses on the stand. Mrs. Mitchell, is it not true that you were committed to a psychiatric facility in January of this year? Yes, on the basis of fraudulent documents filed by my husband. But you were committed, evaluated by multiple psychiatrists, and released after 48 hours when it became clear the commitment was based on fabricated evidence. Is it possible, Mrs. Mitchell, that you are fabricating evidence now? That this elaborate story of poisoning and conspiracy is the product of a disturbed mind seeking revenge on a husband who wanted to leave? I looked at him calmly. Then I looked at the jury. "Mr. Hartley," I said, "I am a former corporate attorney. I graduated top of my class from Northwestern Law. I have never been diagnosed with any psychiatric condition. The only evaluation I have ever received concluded that I was mentally healthy." I paused, letting that sink in. My husband, on the other hand, purchased thallium using his business credit card. He took out a $5 million life insurance policy on me 8 months before I almost died. He has been photographed with his co-defendant for 3 years while lying to me about his whereabouts. And his co-defendant has been connected to the deaths of 3 other men in similar circumstances. I leaned forward slightly. "I am not disturbed, Mr. Hartley. I am detailed. There is a difference." A murmur went through the courtroom. I saw one of the jurors suppress a smile. Thomas Hartley tried a few more angles. But I had an answer for everything. I had spent 12 years with Derek Mitchell. I knew how men like him thought, how they twisted words, how they made you doubt your own reality. I was not going to be twisted anymore. After my testimony, the prosecution called their final witness, Helen Mitchell. The courtroom went silent as Derek's mother took the stand and swore to tell the truth. Derek's face went pale. He had not known she would testify. Helen described everything: Derek's father, the pattern of abuse and deception she had tolerated for decades, the records she had found after his death, the warning signs she had ignored in her son, the way she had stood in that living room and helped her son try to destroy an innocent woman. "I should have stopped this years ago," Helen said, her voice breaking. "I should have protected Carrie instead of enabling Derek. I failed as a mother and as a human being. The least I can do now is tell the truth." The defense had no questions for her. There was nothing they could ask that would not make things worse. Closing arguments came 3 weeks later. The prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece. Shai, the pattern of predation, the calculated cruelty, the lives destroyed. The defense argued reasonable doubt, claimed the evidence was circumstantial, suggested I had poisoned myself as part of an elaborate scheme to frame my husband. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Derek Mitchell, guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty of insurance fraud, guilty of assault. Victoria Sanders, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, 3 counts, guilty of fraud, guilty of identity theft. The sentences came 2 weeks later. Derek, 45 years to life. Vanessa, life without parole. As they led Derek away in handcuffs, he passed within 3 feet of where I sat. He stopped, looked at me, and said something I will never forget. "I loved you, Carrie." I looked at this man who had tried to erase me from existence, who had poisoned me while I carried his child, who had smiled at me every morning while calculating how much longer until I was dead. "No," I said quietly. "You owned me. There is a difference. Learn it in prison." They led him away. I picked up my daughter, kissed her forehead, and walked out of that courtroom into the rest of my life. 3 years later, I stood at a podium in a ballroom at the Four Seasons Chicago, looking out at 500 faces. Survivors, advocates, lawyers, journalists, people who had followed my story and wanted to hear what came next. My book, The Last Message, had just hit #1 on the bestseller list. It told my story, but more importantly, it told the stories of women like me, women who had been gaslit and dismissed and made to feel crazy for seeing what was right in front of them, women who had lost everything before they found themselves. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes, returned to law, specializing in representing domestic abuse, survivors, and victims of financial predators, started a nonprofit that had helped 300 women escape dangerous situations in the past 2 years, moved into a beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park, where Lily had her own room decorated with butterflies and stars. I was not the same woman who had collapsed on that bathroom floor. That woman had died, but someone better had risen in her place. 3 years ago, I said into the microphone, I sent my husband a message that he ignored. I was in pain. I was scared. I was begging for basic human decency from the person who was supposed to love me most. I paused, looking out at the crowd. He was busy with another woman while I was dying on our bathroom floor. He read my messages, all 3 of them, and he chose to silence his phone so I would not interrupt his evening. A murmur went through the audience. Some of them had read the book. Some of them were hearing the story for the first time. I spent years before that night making myself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient. I gave up my career because my husband said his was more important. I stopped seeing friends because he found them annoying. I learned to need less, want less, be less, because every time I was myself, he found a way to make me feel like myself was a problem to be solved. I took a breath. That night, on the bathroom floor, was the worst night of my life. But it was also the night I started to wake up. Because when you are lying alone, dying, and the person who promised to love you forever will not even read your messages, you learn something important. I looked directly at a woman in the front row who was crying quietly. You learn that you cannot make someone care. You learn that your worth is not determined by whether someone shows up for you. And you learn that sometimes the moment someone fails you is the exact moment you start saving yourself. Applause started somewhere in the back and rolled forward until the whole room was on their feet. To every woman who has ever been ignored when she needed help, I continued when they quieted. To every woman who has been made to feel crazy for seeing what was right in front of her, to every woman who has been told her pain was inconvenient, her needs were too much, her existence was a burden, I leaned into the microphone. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And the people who tried to silence you, one day, they will wish they had listened. After the event, I walked along Lake Michigan with Lily. She was 3 now, all curly brown hair and endless questions, her hand warm in mine. Mommy, why do people read your book? Because sometimes people need to know that even when bad things happen, we can be okay again. Are we okay, Mommy? I looked at my daughter, at the sunset painting the sky in oranges and pinks, at the city I had reclaimed as my own. Yeah, baby. We are more than okay. We are free. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat at my desk reviewing files for a new case. A woman whose husband had been hiding assets for years, who had been told she was paranoid when she asked questions, who had found my book and found the courage to leave. There were so many of them, so many women living the life I had escaped. Every week brought new cases, new stories, new reminders that what happened to me was not rare. It was common. It was systematic. And it was usually invisible until it was almost too late. My phone buzzed. A text from Maggie. Guess who tried to file an appeal from prison today? His 15th. Denied again. Maybe try 16th time is the charm, Derek? I smiled and typed back. Some people never learn. Neither do you, thank God. Drinks Friday? I will bring the wine. I set down my phone and looked at the photo on my desk. Lily at her 3rd birthday party, frosting on her face, laughing at something Mrs. Kowalski had said. Next to it was another photo. Me at the book launch, surrounded by women I had helped, women who had become friends, women who had survived. We had all survived. And we were all thriving. 5 years after the trial, I got a call from Agent Reynolds at the FBI. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to discuss your ex-husband. Can you come to the federal building tomorrow morning? I assumed it was routine. Derek had tried to file appeals from prison every few months, each one more desperate than the last. This was probably just another failed attempt. But when I walked into the conference room the next day, I found something unexpected. A woman I did not recognize, early 30s, professional attire, wedding ring catching the light. Carrie, Agent Reynolds said, this is Amanda Crawford. She has been working with us on an ongoing investigation. Amanda extended her hand. It is an honor to meet you. Your book changed my life. I shook her hand, confused. Thank you. But what investigation are we talking about? Agent Reynolds pulled up a chair. Your ex-husband has been running schemes from prison, using his old network, manipulating inmates and guards, trying to rebuild what we took down. We have suspected it for months, but we needed proof. How do I fit in? We want to use you as bait, not directly, he added quickly when he saw my face. We want Derek to think someone from your life is willing to help him. Amanda here has agreed to go undercover as a disgruntled wife who claims to have evidence against you. Derek thinks I ruined him, I said slowly. If someone showed up claiming they could help him destroy me, he would not be able to resist. Exactly. I looked at Amanda. You would be going into a maximum security prison to manipulate a man who tried to murder his pregnant wife. That is dangerous. She met my eyes steadily. My mother was one of Vanessa Blake's earlier victims. Before they connected the dots, before anyone knew what she was. My mother did not survive. The room went quiet. I read about your case when it happened. Amanda continued. I was still in college. I remember thinking, finally, someone stopped them. And then I read your book and I realized this is what I wanted to do with my life. Stopping people like Derek and Vanessa before they destroy more families. I studied her face, looking for hesitation, for doubt. I found only determination. Okay, I said to Agent Reynolds. What do you need from me? The operation took 3 months to set up. Amanda visited Derek in prison, posing as the wife of a colleague at my law firm. She claimed I had destroyed her husband's career, that she had evidence of misconduct that could reopen Derek's case. I watched through one-way glass as Derek fell for it. Watched him lean forward, his eyes lighting up with the same predatory gleam I remembered from our marriage. Watched him incriminate himself over and over, believing he was finally going to get his revenge. He never suspected it was a trap. He never suspected that the woman feeding him information was recording every word. He never suspected that his carefully rebuilt network of prison contacts was systematically being dismantled by federal agents. When they finally arrested his accomplices and added 20 more years to his sentence, I was there to watch. Agent Reynolds called me afterward. He is never getting out now. Not ever. I know, I said. That is the point. That night, I put Lily to bed and sat in my living room, watching the city lights through the window. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It is over. He will never hurt anyone again. I deleted the message and set my phone aside. I did not need confirmation. I had known it was over the moment Derek walked into that trap, unable to resist the chance to destroy me one more time. Some people think revenge is about making someone suffer. It is not. Revenge is about taking back the life they tried to steal from you. Derek Mitchell spent years trying to erase me. Now he is the one who does not exist, locked away in a cell while I watch our daughter grow up in sunshine. The last message I sent him was a cry for help. The last message he will ever hear is the door closing on his freedom. Forever. I stood up and walked to Lily's room, watching her sleep for a long moment. Her chest rose and fell with peaceful breathing. She knew nothing about her father except that he was gone and could not hurt us anymore. Someday, when she was old enough, I would tell her the truth. But for now, she got to be a child. She got to be happy. She got to be free. I closed her door softly and walked back to my desk, where files for my next case were waiting. Another woman, another predator, another fight. But I was ready. I had been ready since the night I died on my bathroom floor, and came back as someone new, someone who refused to be silent, someone who refused to be small, someone who helped other women find their voices when the world tried to steal them. The last message I ever sent my husband was a cry for help. But the last chapter of my story is not about that message. It is about every message that came after. Every woman who read my book and found the courage to leave. Every survivor who walked into my office and found someone who believed her. Every mother who protected her children from a monster in a nice suit. This is my story, but it is also yours and theirs. And every woman who has ever been told she was too much, too loud, too crazy for seeing what was right in front of her. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. And the people who cannot see that, they are the ones with the problem. Not you, never you. If you have ever felt invisible in your own relationship, drop a comment below. Your story matters, and this community is here to listen. If this intro already gave you chills, hit that like button so we know to keep creating content that speaks to your soul. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear it. You never know whose life you might save. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. We post stories every week that will make you feel seen, validated, and empowered. Now settle in. Get comfortable. This is going to be a wild ride. Let us begin. Closing statement. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time means everything to us. Before you go, remember this. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And anyone who makes you feel that way has already shown you who they are. Believe them. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us what resonated most. We read every single one. Like this video if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs hope. And subscribe if you want more stories that remind you of your own strength. We will see you in the next one. Final disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and genuine value to our audience. Every story we create is designed not just to entertain, but to educate, empower, and inspire. We believe that storytelling has the power to change lives, and we take that responsibility seriously. Thank you for trusting us with your time.